Okay, chair statement. This meeting is being recorded by the Charter Review Committee. If any other persons present are doing the same, you must notify the chairperson at this time. No one, thank you. All right, I'm going to take a roll call. Councillor Gilmore.
I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor Forgy. Don't see her yet. Councillor Wheeler.
Here.
Erin.
Here.
John.
Here.
Alan.
Here. David.
Here. Okay. All right. You got a packet, a lot of information for your minutes. I guess that's because of the sequence of events that's happened over the last couple of months. Tammy, I guess, sent out the minutes, and then I jumped in and said, I think I need to amend these minutes ahead of time, which I did. But since they were already in the public record, Tammy went and amended her own minutes to conform with what I had amended. So that's what you'll see as what we did at the last meeting to vote in all those minutes that look like a lot of corrections and changes. If you look online, I am told, I did not double check this, but the minutes without the red lines are in the minutes section. So now we have the minutes of last meeting, which was going over all those minutes, which takes us, I think, somewhere to page 5 or some such thing, because I had to do this myself. And then it says, and Chair Singer actually took over the meeting and we had a discussion. So the last, I think, 3 pages are the discussion we had. I was able to see those notes ahead of time before they went to you. So I've had my chance, not that I'm doing anything other than making them clear, but does anybody have any questions? First of all, can I hear a motion to approve the minutes of what meeting was it? February 1st. Can I hear a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second, anyone? Probably everybody's on mute. John Lunt is making the hand signal. Yeah, exactly. Don't get too complicated with me there. Okay, any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor. I will roll call it because people are looking at our minutes. I'll roll call. So all in favor would be Councillor Gilmore.
Aye.
Councillor Forgy still waiting for her. Councillor Wheeler.
Aye.
Councillor Erin. Maybe someday.
Aye.
John.
Aye.
Alan.
Aye.
And David, aye. Okay, good. Okay, there are no public hearings. There's no motions. Okay, so let's sum up where we are with documentation. First, I took the comments from from my first draft, and I literally merged them into the second draft to show where they would correspond. And that's called Combo Draft 2. And for anybody out in the public that wants to look online, that's a combination of Draft 1 with the comments from councilors and the mayor. Then there's Draft 2, where I took some, what's the right word I'm looking for? I used my discretion to take on what you had said and change the wording as I thought you might like it to be changed in the footnotes, so that I've not really changed any of the body of the charter, but I have changed, the footnotes have changed. And to that, Erin has made a reply. Last meeting, we were going to talk about section 611, which Chris is going to lead, so we can wait for her to show up to the meeting before we get to that portion. And during the month, an exchange of emails occurred between me and Glenn Ayers, who is out in the audience, but will not be given permission to speak. And I asked Glenn, who had presented himself to us once before about the Board of Health, to answer questions about what his interpretation of the state law and our ordinance was, and and our charter section was. And there's an email that I sent to all of you, which addresses his suggestions. So you had a chance to read that. And I know the mayor. I talked to the mayor. So why don't we maybe? I don't know what the mayor's schedule is, so I don't know if she'll stay the whole time. But at least she's here with us, so let's talk about the section 616 and the Board of Health. Let's start off with that. And then we'll wait and see if Chris comes in. And also, Erin's going to leave at 7:15, so maybe we can get some comments from her as well on her response. So let's do that. Any objections to that? Then if there aren't any, let's go forward. Okay, Mayor Rita Gardner, thank you.
Oh, thank you. I am speaking. With respect to Glenn's commentary and his suggestion on the change, I would like to speak to that from the standpoint of my vantage point as mayor, and particularly as mayor during a very challenging health crisis called the pandemic.
This is Chris Forgy. I'm on the line.
I'm sorry. Could everyone mute, please? Who was that?
Oh, no. This is Chris Forgy, and I'm on the phone line.
Oh, hello, Chris. Thank you for entering. I'll recognize you as entering the meeting at whatever was it, 5:30 something, 38 maybe. Thank you. Good. Okay, you weren't there, so we skipped over temporarily section 611 because we wanted you to lead it, and we went to the Board of Health, and so that's where we are. So thanks for letting me know you're at the meeting. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead, Mayor.
That's fine. I don't know what Chris heard of my speaking. I could certainly repeat it because it was only a couple of seconds long, but I am speaking on behalf or on the items presented by Glenn Ayers regarding the health director. Vantage point as mayor during I suspect I would feel the same way even without a pandemic, but I'm speaking primarily from my vantage point as mayor with a very healthy relationship and a very close working relationship as needed during a very challenging health crisis called the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic. So with regard to the health director, I think it is very important that we have a health director that is hired by the mayor. The mayor hires other department heads, other people with substantial responsibility within the city. So I do think that's important. It is not for the Board of Health to hire a position in of that stature, especially under our charter. It is certainly the Board of Health's responsibility to participate in directing the health director and the health director responding to the Board of Health. The important thing about having a good health director and hired by the mayor is I can tell you that we, the city of Greenfield, have pretty much set a gold standard in the state, and I do not mind bragging about that. With regard to how we handled the pandemic from the get-go a year ago and our quick response to it, which was started under Emergency Management Director, Fire Chief Strahan, and the Board of Health and other people involved in health. And at that particular point in time, Jennifer Hoffman, who is our current health director, was on the Board of Health, and she happened to be the chair. So she was instrumental in many of the discussions. We are fortunate this year, we are fortunate to have her there in any year, but this year in particular because she does have a master's in public health. Now, it's not about the person that I'm speaking. It is really about the position, but that position is important, especially to the overall direction of public health. And it's important for that person to report to the mayor as well as to the Board of Health, for the simple reason that the mayor, at the end of the day, regardless, again, it's not about the person, it's about the position. But the mayor is, along with the chief, the head of emergency operations. And so those are the kinds of things that you don't think about in a day-to-day operation of a city when we don't have a pandemic. Health directors direct the department. They participate if their skills so allow them in inspections. They handle all of the things that health departments and under the Board of Health do. Your Board of Health members can be good and are appointed by the mayor as well, which is the way it should be because the mayor appoints other members of other committees. In our particular case, we happen to have also by now a very good Board of Health, all with medical experience, from Dr. Nancy Bershoff, who is chair, to Alyssa Valbona, who is a health expert, as well as registered nurse Kelly, whose name I forgot. The last name I forgot. But anyway, so those people are all very qualified, and it's incumbent upon any mayor to have very qualified people. But not every mayor will give you qualified people to the Board of Health, and I think we've seen that in the past. Nor will every mayor give you a good health director, but they should. And so I think that we need to keep that structure in order to ensure that we can respond to any health crisis that we have. And we need to have the Board of Health working with our health director. I can tell you in the current case, the health director is very mindful of the fact that not only does she report to the mayor, she reports to the Board of Health and is very respectful of them. Does what they want her to do and does not do anything without their blessing. I can attest to that. So as I say, with respect to Mr. Ayer's position as a health agent, former health agent, and his knowledge of healthcare in Franklin County, it is different when you are a municipality than when you are a small town in the county that does receive services from a county organization. We would not have done as well managing the pandemic up to this year, and we would not be a mass testing site and a mass vaccination site without the influence and the knowledge of our health director and her ability to work not only at the local level, but at the state level. So that's all I need to say about that.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Does anybody else have any comments? I want to give some perspective. Does anybody else have any comments?
David, I do.
Is that Chris?
Yes, it is.
All right, I'll have to recognize your voice. Chris, please.
Okay. So I agree with what the mayor is saying, actually. When you come down to look at, we get back to what we were talking about before with our duties and responsibilities in regard to this charter update. The couple of things that you have to remember is that when we structured this charter, we did so to allow for a strong mayor. And I see where part of this proposal actually weakens the authority of the mayor. And I can understand the circumstances that we went through in the prior administration and how it's appropriate for these issues to be discussed by us. But as the mayor did point out, you can't really remedy that. You can't legislate bad behavior on the part of a mayor in regard to the Board of Health. So I think that when you talk about the direct reports and the organizational chart and everything else, the mayor has to be the final place where it stops, because that is the person that was voted and has the mandate from the people in order to do that. So if we adopted some of the things that was suggested, then the structure and the authority for the mayor to oversee all of this is compromised. And again, we shouldn't react to what was. We should say, this is an important piece and we want it to be this way because of the accountability issue and everything else that's in place. So I do appreciate everything Mr. Ayers put together and brought forward for us. I think there's some really important suggestions in there, but at this point, I'm sort of leaning toward just keeping things in place, maybe adding some language that defines the line of report, who's responsible for what and who reports to who. So thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Anybody else? Sarah.
My question is, what is the distinction of when it becomes a department of a health department, and then you need a commissioner and an advisory council? I am having a hard time understanding that those two things, where you have either a board of health who may have a health agent and some staff, versus when you choose to have a department and a health commissioner and an advisory council. And are we in some sort of gray area of sort of having a department, but sort of not having a department? Or it's not really a department, it's something else? I don't understand. I feel like we're in this middle zone that makes it seem like we're not really following the law, or we are because it's home rule. So I'm confused with that.
Okay, good question. I wanted to address it from my experience. Go ahead, Mayor.
Well, I was just going to say, is that a question for me? If so, I can answer part of it, but I'll defer to you, and then if you want to recognize me to help clarify that from my perspective, I will.
Okay, you talking to me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Okay.
Chair Singer.
Hard for me to see who you're looking at.
I'm talking to you.
I think my communication with Glenn brought the truth to this, which is that the way the law is written, you have either the option of a board of health or a health department. We went from a town to a city, and we chose to keep the current form that we had. A town can't have a health department, but a city can. So we just moved this. We just moved whatever we were doing as a town into what we were doing as a city. But instead of giving the select board the power to make the appointments, we gave that power to the mayor. So we didn't really make that. We didn't really make any kind of a transition. But if you look, if now, because we're a charter committee, and you start looking into the weeds, this is my understanding of it, which is as follows. Right now, we have two clear statements in our charter. One talks about the composition, and that part of that's taken from state law. There must be a physician, and who appoints them instead of the select board, the mayor. So that, that's consistent with all the other appointments that the mayor makes. So the distinction, the question here is, once you get to the level after the mayor appointing the board of health, who should directly be in charge of the health director, the mayor or the board of health? In my opinion, when you go to a health department, whatever that is, I don't know what it is, but it sounds like it's a different bureaucracy that a city has to accept that legislation in order to go to. I wouldn't pretend to tell anybody what that really means, but I think it's different from a board of health because that's a statute I think the city has to follow. What we're doing is we have home rule that allows us to decide who's in charge of the agent. So the second sentence in our charter says that the Board of Health will follow the state law or powers that the Board of Health have generally that are understood, state law, which is clear, but doesn't go any deeper than just to describe what boards of health do, by the way. And then the last thing is that the city council has the right to legislate at an ordinance level how it wants to regulate the Board of Health. That's the way the charter reads now. So in spite of the pros and the cons, or maybe using better language, the this side or that side, that's where we stand. So right now, because the charter speaks to the mayor making all appointments, and there's no ordinance that says otherwise, that's the structure we have. So we are fairly within the charter as far as how it works. There may not be a need to create an ordinance unless there was some thinking that home rules should get involved with changing what currently exists. So what you have now is totally lawful and clear. The mayor makes appointments, Board of Health is run by state law. If you look all that stuff up, we have a functioning Board of Health. The only thing is who is in charge of the agent. And again, you could go to health, you could go to the other system, but that would take, I think, a charter commission or people really studying how that works. I can tell you what that, it could be that the health director there does appoint the health agent or is appointed by this council, but we are not within the health department system. That would be a major charter change. We could recommend it, but what we are in now is functionally okay, unless by home rule you wish to change the dynamics of it. Understood? So that's where we would that's where we would talk to the council and say, it works. Do you want to change it to this? What Glenn wrote was good language to make the change that he would hope he thinks that the city should make. So that his language was fine. But the question is, do we want to do that? And it sounds like the current mayor is suggesting not. The former mayor is suggesting not. And so, you know, I don't know what to say about that. So we could just say what we've heard and pass it on to the council, unless somebody has a strong feeling about it, about a change. Then I'd like to hear about that. Besides, okay. So is that understood? Right now, the council has the power, and they'll keep it if we don't make the change. Go ahead, Mayor.
I appreciate Aaron's questioning because I have been thinking about that now for quite some time. Have discussed it within the group of, within the mayor's office and perhaps even with a counselor or two. That I don't think it would be a bad thing to have a health department because we are a city. But as I just explained, I also don't think, I mean, it is working as it is now, but I think that it is worth at least making a recommendation that the mayor explore what it means, perhaps along with the city council, what it means to have a health department and whether that works for us. The health department is pretty significant. I mean, even under Valerie, there is a lot of work to do. It is not the position of the mayor to do that work. And quite frankly, that work is not in a city, is not the position of the Board of Health to do. They are volunteers, at least two of them. We're fortunate that the chair is retired. At least two of them have jobs. So, they're not in a position to direct people to go out and look at septic systems, to direct people to go out and investigate restaurants. They are not in that position to do that. And certainly not. So I think that I fall somewhere in that gray area with you, Aaron. And I do appreciate your sending the many examples of how other communities around us have structured their health departments or whatever. And the Board of Health is always in there. And I would, if I were to have the opportunity to bring to the council a suggestion for a department, and I may well do that in the next year or so. I would never exclude the Board of Health because they are part of Mass General Law and they have a very important function. So that's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you. Just one last thing. I think what Glenn Ayers is saying, that it would be the Board of Health who does the hiring and firing and overseeing of the health director, which would mean that they would be accountable to the results of the health director. So think of it that way. You know, if you like it or you don't, you've got the Board of Health being the accountable place. In the way the charter is written today, the mayor is the accountable person for what happens with the Board of Health. So that, you know, and so there's a question about how accountability was in the past versus how somebody would like to see accountability in the future. And the mayor's saying, two mayors are saying that they would like to see the accountability stay at the mayor's level. So, okay. Again, so Aaron, you sent back some questions, which I personally really appreciate, and I'm sure the members appreciate as well. We talked about the Board of Health. Before you go, and in case when you come back, we're gone, are there things that you want to add to the conversation? Let's start with 611, maybe, because that's where we're going to go next, is into the Public Safety Commission. So do you want to start maybe by giving some of your insight?
Sure. Just a couple things is I liked in draft 2, including that we have a majority of people on the Public Safety Commission who are not retirees. I understand that may cause some issues in terms of recruitment of people to serve, potentially. I'm not sure how that's gone in the past, but I think that's an important aspect, as well as a statement of the mayor using every effort to find a diverse pool of individuals to serve, which I know is difficult. And I know that some mayors are probably more committed to that than others. I would have concern about adding compensation, which is what that was in Mayor/Councilor Forgey's section. I think I'm not certain that there's any other boards that we have that are compensated. And I think that opens a big can of worms for other boards if we're going to go with any sort of compensation. I also think if we do ensure that the commission has a majority of non-retirees, then I think you could lessen the amount of time between retirement and service. I think if you don't, if the majority of people on the commission are retirees, then I think you need a longer time period before they can serve. But I think we could lessen the time if they're not in the majority on the commission. And there was a whole section on the hearing officer, and that seemed a little too in the weeds to me for the charter, and wondered if that was something that the council could look at as an ordinance, if that was something that the council was interested in. But whether or not that needed to be in the charter, I question. So that's my perspective on public safety.
Alan?
Yes, before we went on, I reviewed the proposal prepared by Christine, which is certainly very detailed and all, and probably great in many ways. There are 2 or 3 places in it, Chris, where you use the word a request was made. And I wondered who it was that was making those requests, including, requests for compensation, requests for a change in a lowering of the number of months needing to be retired, a budget line item. So I wondered who it is that is making those requests within your proposal.
Well, how about this? Can we hold that question for a second? It's a good question. Number one, Al, I'm not picking on you, but it seems like you're not mute, so you might be a person who's adding to the noise background, maybe not, but can everybody check to make sure they're mute unless you're in the call or you want to speak? Secondly, Al, why don't we give Chris a chance to summarize her writings in the section and what she was thinking, and then ask her questions. Unless, Chris, you want to just defer and answer his question directly. What would make you feel comfortable?
Oh, it's perfectly fine to put all the questions out there, and as we go through, I can answer them.
Well, you went through. It looks like you went through a lot of work to put forth sort of a different section 611 or suggested changes, and we'd love to hear from you as to what you were thinking as you did each of the changes.
Okay, because I'm on the phone and I can't tell who's at the meeting, are there any representatives from the Public Safety Commission at this meeting?
I don't know if
Nobody's identified? Okay. All right. Well, the person that I've worked with in trying to amend some language is a member of the Public Safety Commission. That would be Gary Longley. He's the only one, really. I mean, from the beginning, there was one small request for a change. But Gary has served for almost 20 years, and he was the only one that knew that this was my article and contacted me, and we discussed this a number of different times. What would this look like with these different changes? So when I refer to it was requested, it was by a member of the Public Safety Commission. I don't know if he represents everybody, and he was delegated to do this on behalf of the commission, but we worked together on this. So I hope that answers one question anyway.
it does. Well, all right, thank you.
Excuse me. The idea here was to increase the board, and by doing so, of course, encouraging the mayor to get the best possible candidates to work on this. And in light of the things that we've been facing this past year in our country, and also when we're looking at the, say, Charlottesville, Virginia recommendations of what they did to adopt a new approach to community policing. And I have not heard from any members of the police department on this matter either. The idea was that if there were 7 people, then the duties of the board could not only be split up, it could be expanded. And with direct members to the public, like 2 liaison members to the fire department, 2 to the police, 2 to public dispatch, 1 member as chair. So that would make it clear to all the department heads, the people in the public, who you want to discuss these things with. I realize that it might be an internal organization piece for the Public Safety Commission to vote in, and I agree with Aaron's comments that said a lot of these could be ordinances, and it could be. But I prepared this so that regardless of whether it was the Charter Commission that was looking or ordinances that was looking, there would be a number of suggestions on what it should appear like. So personally, I feel public safety, this is my opinion, should be 7 members. And the interface is not necessarily a bad idea because, as I said, it directs people to be responsible for certain areas of public safety. The only other, you'll see some changes which will go to calendar year. There was a question, are we going to still keep our commissions and committees at 3 years or 4 years in staggered terms? There was a request for consideration of compensation. I put that down, but I am not in favor of it. I'm just reporting what was reported out to me. I am not in favor of that compensation. And that was the stipend language was sort of picked up from what we have for council, for instance. The budgeted request line item was for reimbursables. So that, I do not think that, I think that we should consider that, or the mayor should consider that, because there are expenses with going to meetings or, you know, traveling or things. There's those eating expenses which we're not really doing at this point. So I realize every budget has got a line item in there, and I don't know if being a commission warrants the budget line item, but that would be for the mayor to decide. Then the other thing was the language, so that it's just not police and fire. It does expand emergency services, which we've all agreed upon. The capital budget requests, again, there's a bit of confusion out there as to how all of these things come about. So the language that has been submitted has included a bigger presence with the commission in talking with the mayor about, say, capital needs or even budget needs. Bottom line, it all rests with the mayor. That's the bottom line. And we're just spelling out, when we talk about inspections and when commissioners can go into the departments and what things they can look at, we're just clarifying that language a little bit more to make sure that, you know, they're allowed to see reports and status, things like that. Again, department heads instead of the word chief. Hang on just a minute here. I'm working off of 2 computers, so please bear with me. There was a time, some of the history of this, they went to a public safety commission. One of the big functions of that, I think when the charter, and David, you might know some of the background here too, was that there would be an outside board that would help with personnel, promotions, advancements, interviews, that would probably would attempt to at least put it into a neutral territory away from the mayor and make chief appointments less political. And I think that's what some of the language in here is set up for. Now we get to the part where I think that is really one of the most important pieces that this committee really needs to look at, and that is, what are we going to do about police, fire, EMS, all of these departments working for the city and being made accountable or being held accountable to the public. And again, it's not to lessen anything that the mayor has control over. I am a big fan of a strong mayoral form of government. But it seems to me, in light of where we've been, all of these things here really kind of play into what do we do about it. Suggestion was made to me by Gary Longley that Public Safety Commission really needs to, from amongst themselves, elect a public hearings officer, complaint officer, something that's not adding up right. One person would be elected from within the commission and would serve as the sort of hearing officer, investigative officer, until the complaint was resolved. And it could be resolved in many ways. It could be dismissed. It could be a full investigation. It could be a personnel matter, any of those things. So items C, D, and E, and F are basically steps as to how these hearing pieces should be handled. And rather than put together a citizen review board, which is one suggestion, it was thought that if we could divide up the workload so that not just one person every time hears complaints, but the complaint officer or the hearings officer rotates through the 7-member board. And hopefully we don't have that many complaints, but one way of looking at it is everybody gets a turn to be a hearing officer. I just added a few other things for clarification and make sure that the board is meeting at least once a month. And I just can't help myself, but when it talks about the minutes, it really felt like I had to include executive session in accordance with open meeting laws, because I don't know how many boards know that they have to keep minutes of open meeting laws. Even if it's executive session, they have to keep the minutes. And then when the issue is resolved satisfactorily, the minutes have to be released to the public. And I think that would be an important piece if we're talking about complaints or hearings about staff, personnel, procedures that are going on within the department. The commission, again, being made up of employees, former employees, retirees, that kind of thing. Those, again, are arbitrary numbers. It's really up to what we're most comfortable with. And I think we should keep the commission's members as being special municipal employees. So that kind of, the brunt of the change really goes into how we organize this committee to be more responsive to the public, especially with concerns, public safety concerns, or the behavior of employees, including department heads / chiefs. So that's it, I guess. And thank you for letting me give you backup information about this.
Thank you, Chris. That was
If it's
excellent.
right, whether you, not right or wrong, whatever the commission decides to do is perfectly, it's just these are ideas, they're thrown out there.
John? No? You're just waving at me? How do you?
No, I'm good. Sorry.
That's okay.
Waving at someone off screen. Sorry.
Your eyes were looking right at me. Okay.
Mine aren't.
Yours aren't, that's true. Anybody have any comments on this? This is a little out of my league in terms of experience. Alan, go ahead.
A bit ago, David, you sent out a link that related to actions by the city of Charlottesville and their creation of a civilian review board. And I looked at that and found it very interesting, and it certainly sounds like they are just in the infancy of creating that, but they had some very clear and strong principles related to it. The thing that struck me in reviewing it is that civilian review board does not perform any of the functions that our public safety commission does. The civilian review board appears to be, from what I could read, solely concerned with responding to civilian complaints about public service employees, and including doing investigations, et cetera, et cetera. And I guess what wondered about is the charter previously, and most of what Christine prepared talks about a lot of the administrative duties, interfacing with the departments, coordinating on budget priorities, et cetera, et cetera. And there's just a little bit about, I guess, what you would call investigations or follow-ups on citizen complaints. And I guess what I was wondering is if it makes sense for our city to go ahead with having, or possibly having, two bodies. One which would be a public safety commission, which would deal with many of the intricacies of running these departments, and including personnel, et cetera, et cetera. And another one that would be created, such as the one in Charlottesville, which is called the Civilian Review Board, which then has different criteria for its members, different criteria for meetings, specifications about investigations. So I just thought, I looked at it and I thought given the tenor of the times, that the idea of cramming everything into this one portion of the charter and making it usable is a very tough task, I would say, and that there might be a good reason to establish or begin the process for establishing a citizen review board that would be almost solely concerned with civilian complaints about public safety employees. So that's one thought.
Thank you. That seems consistent with what I talked about before, Alan. And that was one of the reasons I sent out the report, to give you, to show you that, some of the community had actually addressed it, and a community that had been involved in something real. Thankfully we have not. I guess, Chris, I don't mean this to make this like you're the advocate for something, but I think the question I would have, so in my mind, the Public Safety Commission is kind of the overseer generally of these departments. It's a civilian board to oversee these specific departments that are pretty serious, parts of our community with relation to their interfacing with the public, for fire, for emergency, for police. And let's assume that we're able to internally monitor better when complaints come up within that body. Does it preclude expanding to a civilian board for many of the reasons that we discussed, that it's really difficult to merge this board with a civilian review board just because of the nature of the relationships? I mean, it just doesn't seem to work. You're working with people, and then when complaints come in, you're kind of judging those people. And I don't care how well you do it, you're gonna defeat many of the purposes of the trust that's engendered from it. Chris, the question I had was, in section C, you talked about complaints, about the different members rotating to hear complaints. I maybe I didn't see because I'm not as familiar with it, but did you, are you saying, where would the complaint come from? Would it come from a civilian? Would it come from, where would it come from? What would be the source of a complaint that would go to this group?
Okay, that is a very good question. And my first response to you, David, would be it would have to come from outside. If it's an internal issue, then I think that would be handled by the Public Safety Commission, department heads, mayor. The mayor having the final piece. When we're talking about outside complaints with the hearing officer, I think that there should be a different mechanism in which that can happen. So I would answer that way.
Right, but okay, but I'm still going to push you a little bit. You know,
can.
try to imagine how these complaints might originate. You know, what type of complaints they might be. Let's say it's a pretty serious complaint about a civil rights violation or gross conduct by one of these departments, employee of the department. How do you even initiate a complaint like that and also protect the due process of the person involved, et cetera, et cetera? You know, how do you go from how do you build a system around fairness with that by just having it simply stated in the ordinance, in the charter? Again, I'm not saying this to embarrass you as much, just to push the thinking. A complaint in and of itself is easy to think of. Oh, a complaint comes in, but how does it come in? Because once that complaint comes in, that's pretty serious business. And part of what I thought we were up against, which would cause us to put a lot more effort into seeing what a civilian review board would even be like, is the delicacy of bringing these kinds of complaints. So again, I'm imagining there could be certain kind of complaints that are, I mean, I don't know if there's such a thing, I haven't thought it that hard, but that aren't civil rights complaints. I don't know what they would be, because most people, if they're harmed personally and want to bring a complaint, they're not complaining. I mean, they could be complaining that, I guess, a police officer is driving fast on High Street, or they could complain that they see somebody off duty more than they think it should be, and those kind of complaints might be heard. But a serious civil, you know, so help me with that. If you haven't thought it that much through, which is fine, then I guess it may be that the committee recommends your changes to a point, which seem like they're healthy clarifications, but then stops at what point to say, we can't go this far with this commission, we really need something else. And that would really push the community to have this kind of a civilian board, because we've admitted that there's a gap. And if people are really serious about it, we can't solve it by amending this provision. We need to actually go original, you know, or we need to add something. So did you think, or when you talked to Gary, were you thinking about the types of complaints, again, and how they would be, how due process would be served?
Well, my initial response to all of this is that there are complaints are generally made either to the governing body, which would be the mayor, the school committee, the council, those that are elected to represent, and then from there through internal process, which has to be defined. It would be handled, or it would be sent to. It could be sent to the hearing officer. Could be sent to a public board. The question that I have is, whatever is decided as to the appropriate mechanism to deal with this, whether it's a civilian review board or review board within the commission. These two entities that I see them have the authority to investigate and recommend, and all of that goes back to the mayor. Even a civilian complaint board would go back to the mayor. And I'm going to cite the example that was in the newspaper today about something that happened recently at the school department, and the complaint has gone to the school committee, which is appropriate. So mechanisms for complaints, and if I guess I'm asking if it rises to a criminal complaint at some point, then obviously there's a different course of action that's in place. But at this point, we're trying to figure these things out for ourselves. This is about our self-governance. So I'm basically, to me, if you have this kind of a hearings officer, or if you have a civilian review board, the piece would be the same. It would have to go through an identified mechanism and would all go back to the mayor. It would be the mayor's responsibility to enact. Am I missing your question, Dave?
Nope, you're not. I'm just thinking of more things while you talk about it, but I don't want to monopolize. Anybody else have any thoughts about it?
Could I speak?
Please.
I would like to address a few things that have been said here this evening and that I have seen in the notes. Let me just first off address the increase in numbers of the board. I fully support that. I too have also spoken to Mr. Longley about that, and he believes strongly in that. I can tell you that it would certainly, from my personal perspective, facilitate my ability to get new members on that commission. Because right now it is a full commission. I'm not going to circumvent the law, i.e. the charter and the role. No one on that board is committing anything wrong as a member of that commission. So I'm not going to ask them to resign. I don't have any reason to do that. So it is a full board right now. That leads into my discussion, or what I wanted to address with regard to diversity. Let me just say here, I would be the first one to attempt to put diversity on the Public Safety Commission, from the fact that it has no women on it, to the fact that it has no people of color on it. It has no members of the, to my knowledge, LGBTQ community, et cetera, et cetera. So I have no problem with the diversity piece of this. What I do have a problem with, and I am uniquely aware of this as the person who makes the appointments, is as good as those words sound, I would not want them to be codified, for the simple reason that we are a 91% white community. So the opportunity to name people of color is lessened by that. I have had instances where I have held positions open. We have begged people within the boundaries of the law, which are, please, quote unquote, come to work for us, even if you're a volunteer. We cannot specifically state what we want in terms of diversity any more than I could if I was running an ad in the paper for, a new police chief or a health director or anything else. That just comes from within. So I'm constantly attempting to make sure that people of color in this community understand they are welcome to come forward and say, I want to serve on this board. And I do, to a certain extent, as much recruiting in that area as I possibly can, but I often come up short because people, for whatever reasons, can't spend the time on it. So know that as your mayor, I am committed to that, and I think it is a good practice. But I certainly would never want to see it codified in either an ordinance or a part of the charter. And that's kind of the way I feel about that. With regard to first of all, I appreciate everything that Chris put forward, and in general, what she put forward, I have no problem with. I thought I had hoped that I had an opportunity to comment, and I don't think I did, and I don't think I sent you comments on it. So, and I can't go point by point, but certainly the increase in the board. With regard to retirees, et cetera, I'm not sure that that's helpful one way or the other. I do think it's important when you're talking about the Public Safety Commission that at least some members of that board have had experience in one way or other in their lifetime with public safety work. And let me just tell you that in the way we look at it at the town level, public safety isn't police, fire, and now EMTs. Public safety is your animal control officer, your dispatchers, your parking and enforcement people. They all fall under the title, umbrella, whatever you want to call it, of public safety. So keep that in mind as well. You could have somebody at the dispatch level that was also behaving badly in some capacity or the other. So just know that, and I don't mean to single them out. That has not happened. I have no knowledge of any of that ever happening. But I'm just saying that there is something to, if we think about this going forward, we need to be very cognizant of what constitutes public safety in the city of Greenfield that naturally falls under that title. As far as a separate commission goes, Al's comments tonight were the first time that I ever, in my thinking about it, really heard it laid out in a way that I thought was cogent. So I appreciate what he said. The Public Safety Commission, as it is, does deal more with the internal administrative work of the by and large police and fire department. And because under the fire department are EMS, emergency management, and under the police department are dispatch and so forth, animal control. Animal control falls under two categories, health and public safety. So there's those things get covered if there are complaints. But just so you know, I am not 100% opposed to a recommendation to consider how we might have a civilian review board. I would not want it to be a huge number of people, I don't think, at this stage of the game. David brings up many things that are important. Due process is one of them. People who conduct investigations really have to have those skills. They have to be trained. And by and large, the people that are trained to do that are the police department. And so, you know, even if it's an internal investigation, and I know, given the tenor of the times, that has not worked in many communities. And it may, from time to time, not have worked here, perhaps under different leadership in the police department. But so it is a complicated thing. I wouldn't want to just say, thou shalt set up a board of, a civilian review board made up of X number of people. I really do think we need to be planful about that and consider all of these questions. As far as rotating hearing officers go within that is not a bad idea, because it does, again, ensure often a diversity of opinion. And if it is the same person over and over again, or if it is the full board over and over again, you may not, depending on what the makeup of the board is, you may not get a all viewpoints accounted for. So I'm not opposed to a rotation of, at the end of the day, hearing officers within that board, as long as they have very specific duties, that may set them apart a little bit in their role as hearing officers from other aspects of what they do on the Public Safety Commission. I think I covered everything I wanted to cover.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a couple of things. Does anybody else have anything to say?
Could
Okay,
I
so-
just kind of spitball for a second, David?
Sheila, of course. I can't see you,
Yeah,
but I can
well,
hear you.
I'm trying to think of how we bring diversity to a board when we have a town that's so overwhelmingly white. And I'm wondering if it would be helpful to write into the qualifications that someone has to have experience with, and like I said, I'm spitballing, but they have to have experience with, critical race theory or something like that, so that if you have someone who has lived experience, then they would fit that criteria. And if you don't have someone with lived experience, maybe you have someone who has some sort of educational background, so that it opens it up so that we're not saying, you know, white people, please don't apply, but still sort of having this space that can be occupied by people who, you know, went through the School of Hard Knocks or, you know, some other formal institute of education. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but it's at least maybe a starting point to think about it. But that's all I wanted to add.
Thanks. Otis.
Thanks. This is a tricky one. I actually think that Alan really nailed the language by saying that the composition shall reflect the demographics of the community, which means that with a potential membership of 7 members, you're not obligated to have, you know, we understand the demographics in Greenfield right now. People of color are under 10% and LGBT are probably around 10%. You know, that may change. The Latino population is certainly growing. But it makes it clear that a mayor should seriously consider diversity. And it also makes it clear that having no women is absolutely unacceptable. So I guess I really like Alan's language. And then I had one other comment, which was just that the provision to restrict members of the Public Safety Commission to no more than 3 retirees, to my mind, it becomes very important in the absence of a civilian review board, i.e. if the Public Safety Commission is the body tasked with investigating complaints, then I think that that provision is important. If there are separate bodies, then I'm not as convinced that that provision is necessary. And those are just my comments for now.
I want to grok that for a second. John, then Alan.
So I think when I'm listening to people talk here, for me, one of the central issues here is striking that balance between having people, as the mayor said, who are qualified to investigate, and the fact that this is just my opinion, this comes up because of an inherent distrust in the system for certain populations within the community. We don't have to have demographics to show us that's true. I tend to side with the mayor that expertise in investigating is very important. I tend to believe that in general. I think expertise is something Americans need to be recommitting themselves to. But I think that even if it is a rotating officer, there has to be something in the language that addresses what I believe is a real concern in the community, whether it's valid or not, that this is a difficult thing to do. It's difficult to go and lodge a complaint. There's not a tremendous amount of faith in some quarters that it will be followed up on in an expeditious or honest manner. I'm not saying that that is true. I'm just saying that that is certainly something that is out there. So I would think that there would have to be a real attempt to get more diversity in, so the viewpoints and voices of people who have traditionally felt that they weren't taken seriously enough or they weren't shown respect in the process feel like they have a real voice. I think you could probably do that with language within the rotating officer system, because I do think if you have an entirely different board made up of people who are supposed to investigate these, I'm not sure how you would find qualified candidates for that, for people who know how to do that. So I tend to agree with the mayor, but I do think there has to be the recognition that the distrust in the current system is a real thing, and that we would be wise to try and figure out ways to address that. Thanks.
Thanks. Alan?
Yes, I just wanted to agree with Otis, basically that the issue of how many retired police or fire employees is on the commission is very key if that commission is investigating complaints. If there's somehow a separation between, I don't know, administrative and complaints or something like that, then the restriction against former employees is not at all important, and actually, would add a lot of expertise in the area of administration of those departments. So that's the key thing to me is that in a complaint situation, there's almost no way that it can be anything but adversarial, or at least sometimes adversarial. And in that kind of a situation, people who have worked with the people that are being investigated or that have been identified in a complaint, it just doesn't even make sense to put them, in my mind, in that position to try to make a neutral decision or understand all the issues that are involved. So, as I say, to me, the issue of separating the two functions makes a lot of sense. And if we do that, then a lot of the current language for the Public Safety Commission, I think, probably works well. And almost everything that Chris put in there is would be fine if there's a separation of those two functions.
Thanks, Alan.
David, can I comment? It's Chris.
Of course.
Okay, thank you. To pick up on something that Sheila said, I think that if we should look back at the committee against domestic violence that's written up in the charter. And if we're looking for a model, perhaps we could use what exists in there for part of the civilian review board or part of adding civilians to the review process, because on that committee, there are people that are involved with the courts and people involved with different organizations around Greenfield. So I'm just pointing that out as a possibility for us to think about, and maybe we can meld some of those ideas from that particular article into a final piece with this.
Thank you. Okay. I would like to say something. Does anybody else want to say anything before I take my turn? No. Okay. It just seems to me that there's no way around it, that there needs to be a separate civilian review board in order to handle the tough situations that we're talking about. There's just no question about it. However, we don't have one. It needs to be created. It's going to take time to do that. In the meantime, I think that Chris's suggestions are very good. Thank you again, Chris. And that what I noted as a scribe of some sort was just in C, where it says serving as such until the complaint is resolved. That somewhere in this section, we could do two things at one time. Make a suggestion to expand the fact that the Public Safety Commission can hear certain types of complaints, but then put an exception into it that kind of creates like a vacuum, which is that since the Public Safety Commission can only hear up to this level, and since we don't have this other thing there which to go to, it would kind of force us to create that component. Because I don't think that I cannot see as a lawyer how right now anybody can come in front of the Public Safety Commission and make a criminal complaint against either to get justice, which John was talking about in terms of confidence, or to be able to procedurally do it because you'd be screwed from the first thing that was submitted past the mayor's office. Because once it gets past the mayor, you have to be careful about confidentiality. So that's where I'm ending with it. I don't have any answers to it, but that's how it seems to be playing out. So that Chris's language could give the Public Safety Commission some more power to hear certain types of things, which would be good. I just don't know what those things are. So that's how I see it. I want to really speak to, though, what the mayor said. And I want to say it with absolutely no offense to the mayor, because I totally get what the mayor's thinking, what Mayor's Wiedegartner's thinking about in terms of being handcuffed by strict definitions. In this day and age, it's incumbent upon communities, I think, in order to overcome institutional racism, to codify things that make it clear that we're codifying those things. Yes, we have a wonderful Mayor Wiedegartner who wouldn't dare do anything like that, and that's why we elected her. But it's important for the community to speak out and say that this is what our expectation is. There are ways in which a municipal lawyer or a civil rights lawyer or whatever, I'm sure the mayor's part of state and national committees that can help her out or help us out, to have a set of criteria that you use in order to get people to serve on this committee, maybe the Human Rights Commission, committees that are clearly in need of diversity. Take your steps 1, 2, and 3. If you end up with people not coming in, then that might be an outreach problem, but it's not a legal problem anymore. But I think to leave it out is just not the way we should be doing business in 2021. And I think it's important for the community to know that built right within our charter is a requirement that we do this. We can do what's necessary on the backside to make sure that if somebody were to even complain that we weren't doing it properly, and you know what, it would hold the executive branch's feet to the fire to make sure that the Human Rights Commission and the Public Safety Commission were diverse. So I know, Mayor, that you have to agree if the council were to think differently of it, and I'll leave it to you and the council to figure it out. But I'm not that afraid of your being hamstrung by that language. I actually think it would help you and cause you to elevate the way that we process this stuff. Alan?
Yes, the only suggestion that was made related to that, all it says is that the mayor shall make every effort. And as far as I can see, that does nothing to handcuff the mayor in making appointments.
Yeah.
It's what is it? A strong suggestion, but not not fully enforceable and not limiting truly in any way.
No, it's a clearly stated policy decision. It's a city. The city is saying to the world, this is our policy. We seek diversity. That's it. It just says it. It's not a below the surface thing. It says it. We seek diversity in this area. I mean, we should seek diversity in all areas, but this being especially sensitive, as well as the Human Rights Commission, we would hope that the community would have that as a stated policy so that people feel, just by reading it, they might think that they're living in a safer community. So that's my take on it. But I think we do have to address, and I'll let you speak, John. I mean, the fact that there's a gap now. If we accept Chris's language, and we cannot allow a complaint of all types to reach this rotating board, there has to be some exception, I think. Unless maybe we just leave it there and take our chances. But I like the language, but I think it cries out for a civilian review board. So who wanted to speak? Alan, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the key part that I would see is in Chris's proposed language. I mean, essentially it says all written complaints shall be forwarded to the chief or department head to which they relate, and the department's head shall investigate or cause to be investigated, and then submit their findings and recommendations. And, that is essentially the process that is often been used, and it requires people or departments to investigate themselves, which just is not overall a good policy in my view.
Right.
You know, that there's just too much going on within a department with a relationship between the department head and other employees, et cetera, that, you know, standing by that as a process is not, I don't think it meets the current needs of the population.
Yeah, no, I hear you. John?
So for me, I guess the question then is, how do you get from here to there, right? Because there is no civilian board. I think there's been enough discussion that it's clear that there are ideas that a board like that, if it were charged to investigate serious matters, would need to be filled with people who know how to do that, within pretty explicitly laid out parameters for a board like that. We don't have those parameters. So if we're going to say at level X, whatever that is, you have to then switch over to this board that may in fact be modeled on the Charlottesville model. There would have to be a lot of work done, a lot of careful language put together. So my question is, we're no, at least only in my view, we're nowhere close to that right now. So what is the idea in the interim? That we will use the good suggestions that Councillor Forgy has put forth as a sort of an interim measure while we further explore things like this? Or do we feel like that's just an issue for the council? I think there's too much here to just say, we're going to leave it the way it was. I agree with Alan completely. But I also think that if we're going to create a new board that's empowered to look into very serious matters, we better have thought very clearly about what qualifications you have to have for that board and what powers that board will have. I have no doubt that there are Greenfielders who could do it, but we're just not there yet. So I'm unclear. I guess I'm asking, where are we then? And what are we saying? Are we saying that we'll adopt the suggestions or some of the suggestions that Councillor Forgy has put forward, but we're then going to say to the city council, well, you better get moving on this? Or are we going to put ourselves sort of halfway in between both solutions and get neither? I'm a little unclear as to what next steps are that are implementable and achievable in a reasonably short period of time. And if we don't know that those are going to happen, I'm not so comfortable making changes. I feel like we're just opening up the door before the work is done.
Thanks, John. I mean, I'll just share, in my mind, I think we have outlined exactly what we need to do. I personally think that the diversity definition should be supported by this committee. I think that Chris's changes, unless there are things hidden in it, like I was thinking about the types of complaints, there are hidden things in it that are difficult to support. I would suggest that her changes be suggested to the city council and the mayor, as well as the diversity issue, as we've said. And then we would note the vacuum and note it and give a suggestion. And to tell you the truth, John, I don't even think this is so much of a council issue as I think it's a grassroots issue. I think there's a lot of people in the community. When I hear Alan speak, I wonder if he himself is part of a grassroots group or just good thinking about it. But there's definitely grassroots thinking about this that will come up as this report goes out to the community. So I would say whether Civilian Review Board is ever thought of is up to the citizens, I think. And the other two things are up to the council. So let the council do its work, put out, APB that it's an opportunity to create a civilian review board and move with that. So does that work for you? Or do you think by making Chris's changes, we're opening up some sort of a Pandora box?
I don't have an overall objection to what you're saying. I just think in practice, that line is what we're saying is until something like that happens, until there's a grassroots, however that works, let's say it works exactly the way you envisioned it. Until then, there are no complaints that are serious enough or rise to a level that they won't go through that same process, because there is no other process. And that's where I think if we put together a recommendation that says we should implement what Councilor Forgy recommends, I think it should at least say that the Charter Commission recognizes that this may not be a complete solution, and that the citizens of Greenfield, in conjunction with their representative government, needs to address this further. Because I just don't feel like it's finished. And if we're going to leave it to the council or grassroots to finish it, let's just make sure we say that.
Yeah, good. I'm with you 100%. I think that's exactly. I could say that's exactly what I said. So that's it. You said it a little differently, but that's exactly what I said. I said you have to point out that there's more to be done. You can't just. Okay. Everybody good with that as kind of a final point on this? Okay, great. Good discussion. And Chris, thank you again. Good work.
Thank you.
I know you're blushing and we can't see you, but that's okay. All right, so Erin went over her email. Okay. We did the Board of Health. I guess I want to go over our process as a group and what I'm thinking about as I'm doing what I'm doing. So we've had a first draft, a combo draft, a second draft. Erin's made some comments. That's where we are with go, and we have these meetings to talk about things. We've had some good discussions today. This is what I would ask of all of you. I'm not going to compel any of you to write back and say how you feel about every change in the charter, the drafts. That's not what I'm asking. But I want you all to read them, because I know at some point you're all going to read it, and I don't want you to read it when we get to the end and you read something and you say, oh my God, are they really thinking of making that change? So I'm assuming that where we are now is that people are satisfied with how things are moving along. Of course, I think there needs to be a draft 3 that incorporates this meeting's discussion. Erin brought up something about section 7.7 that I wanted to talk about. I think if she comes back in a minute, she'll be lucky enough to join us to talk about it. But just to do some housekeeping, as we went through the charter, I mean, in my notes there are things like we should come back to this. We'll come back to this. We've talked about it for 20 minutes. Let's come back to this. My list of those things are public safety, which we've done, Board of Health, which we've done. Erin had comments about the temporary mayor piece, that's a little piece to discuss. Ranked choice voting, there seems to be some discussion about whether we should form an opinion or not, but I think we've got enough examples to put out to the community. Oh, I forgot to ask the mayor. I spoke with the city clerk and asked her what her relationship is with the mayor in relation to the section about the city clerk. And people may all know this already, but just to put it out there. So the city clerk is appointed and can be dismissed by the city council, but has a contract with the mayor, and the salary is determined by the mayor. So the question arises, should there be some charter statement that says something more for the following examples? The city council thinks the clerk is terrific. The mayor thinks the city clerk should be fired. Who decides? Even better, on a day-to-day level, the president of the council goes to the clerk and says, I need this by 5 p.m. And the clerk says, well, I've got the mayor breathing down my neck for something by 5 p.m. And the council president says, yeah, but I got to have it by 5 p.m. because I have a meeting tonight. And the clerk says, well, no, the mayor's got this for Friday and it's really important. So I'm waiting for some sort of a reply as to what they think they do. I don't know if people on the committee have any sense of what that would be. Aaron, I was talking about the clerk, and I had spoken with the clerk about the clerk's relationship with the council and the mayor. And the clerk contracts with the mayor, so there's a clear. So even if it's not in the charter, that's the culture. So that would control. And who decides to dismiss the clerk, and who decides who's super in control of day-to-day operations. So those questions have not been answered. I did ask the city clerk to have a conversation with the mayor. So let's see what happens. So that's another section. Are there any other sections that I've missed? The question, Aaron, is, are there sections that we've gone through that we haven't come back to, that we haven't talked about, like public safety, board of health, clerk? I know, Aaron, you had a question about the mayor's temporary absence, but that I consider that a little more of a refinement. But what about sections? Are there other sections that, if you want to look through your notes, is there something that people feel was missed? I also said, Aaron, that we're at the point now where I'm assuming that we are narrowing down the sections to tone up, and that we've talked back through all the sections, at least to come back to them. I'm happy to have that happen one more meeting, the next meeting, if we've forgotten something. But after that, I'd like to think that everything up to that point, unless you're telling me you want to keep talking about it, I'm gonna iron, what I'm trying to say. I don't want to keep going back and back and back, because I don't mind talking about it, don't get me wrong, but I don't want to think that because I'm the person who's in charge of kind of collecting this stuff, so it would help me if that would be the case. Erin brought something up. Since she came back, we're going to keep going for a little while. Erin brought something up about section 7, the initiative petition. She raised an interesting question that I'd like to talk about at this point, which is that the way the current charter reads for the initiative, that's from the ground up, citizens need to get X number of signatures. We can look at the exact amount. Let's say it's 5%, whatever it is. Then they come to the council approves it or disapproves it. If the council disapproves it, it goes back to the group, and they have to get an additional 25% more signatures from the original 5%. So let's say 7.5%. And then in that submission goes, if I'm not, I should read this. I believe that then goes directly to the voters. So in order to get it to the voters, you have to bring in another group. And it seemed like, so we made an executive decision, like, let's see what it reads like to take it out and not make it so onerous. But maybe it should be a higher number. So it's a number higher than 5%, because you don't have to go back to the extra 2.5%. Goes to the city council, they don't agree with it, it goes to the voters. So understand this, that would be there's two systems. One is there's a higher threshold to begin with, goes to the council, they disagree, it goes to the voters. The other is a lower threshold to get the council to think about it. Maybe they will, maybe they'll think it's great. And so you don't have to go out for the extra votes, but then if they don't, then you have to go out for the extra votes. So you don't have to go out for the extra votes in the first place. You could, because the difference between 7.6 and 7.7, as I read it, is that 7.6 is can you please look at this? And section 7.7 is you have to look at it. And if you're not going to support it, then with enough support on our end, we're going to take it to the voters. The other thing that has been changed is in the current charter, there's a going to the voters within 180 days of the second petition. There's a real number of days that goes to the voters. In our change to take out the supplemental, we just left it up. We just left it up to the council to decide what to do. So maybe it's not a discussion that we can have in detail, but are there enough people who generally think maybe the supplemental petition is a good enough idea that we might want, Alan and I might want to go back and revisit the language. So that's my first question. And Aaron, if you want to add to that, please do.
The only thing I would say is that it just seemed like, why go back to the council if then they're going to reject it and you're going to go to the voters anyway? Then why not just go to the voters, but have a higher threshold in order to do that? To me, if you're going to hold an election, especially a special election, but even if it's with a biennial election, it seems like a higher threshold is in order. So that was my thought process in, if you take out supplemental petitions, it just seemed like the higher threshold was warranted.
Okay, so the higher threshold is warranted, but in the current charter, you go, the city council doesn't vote again with the supplemental petition. They just are forced to call a special election. They don't vote again. It's their duty to call a special election. And we took the special election piece out, just saying, you know, that if you get a higher threshold, if that's what you're thinking, go to the city council, they reject it, then it goes to the voters.
So David, maybe I can wait if Aaron has something to say.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to say, like, you know, as a city councilor who was fairly new, you know, when this started coming up, you know, before, I think that the way the charter is written, you know, in section 7 is very confusing. So there was a person who happens to be on this call right now who submitted a petition to us, and I remember being at a council meeting and making a motion to hear what this person had to say, and people were appalled that I would even listen. And I got, like, not quite death threats on Facebook, but, you know, I had people really handing it to me for days afterwards. But the charter says that the city council has no choice. So it would be nice to kind of clarify that. And I think sometimes what helps is layman's words, you know, like, having, like, gone through this in depth with this group every month for the last, you know, several months, I have a much clearer understanding of the charter now. But first read through, when you're not a lawyer, it's dense language. So maybe, and I guess I could volunteer to take that on, but clean it up and just make it a little bit more clear so that people understand, like, the difference between these two sections, or these two paragraphs in section 7. Do you understand what I mean?
I do. I've understood all along for the desire to have this language simplified, but this is statutory language, and some of these words come out of the state Massachusetts general laws. So if you want to start messing around with language, then you have to be able to defend yourself when somebody really doesn't understand what's going on and tries to say that our statute is vague or illegal for those reasons. So that's why we put the appendix in, to help people.
Okay, well,
through the complexity of it. So if you didn't want to hire a lawyer, you can look at the appendix and it tells you the steps. It's not, the appendix is pretty straightforward.
Okay, I'll take a look at the appendix. Have you looked at the appendix?
Have you looked at the appendix?
I'm sorry?
Have you looked at the appendix?
Not recently, and not thinking about this.
Would
so
you do
I can
that?
take a look at it and see if maybe that's a good place to clean it up. Yeah. But it feels like just a statement to let folks know, because I mean, I was just, inundated with hate mail when that happened. Except it was, we needed, as counselors, follow the charter. It needed to happen.
I don't know enough to know exactly under what section the incident you're talking about was brought to the council. It could have been brought to the council under section 7.6, which gives you the discretion to vote to say no. Alan, I'm not going to recognize you to speak. And so that may be why bringing it up in your discretion caused a political outrage. But in this section, if a certain amount of voters file a petition, I think the word shall act is pretty clear. I mean, we can make it in bold, but shall act and within a certain period of time so that they can't filibuster it. Then the way this charter is written, if the city council says, nope, we don't like it, then you have to go out and get more signatures and bring it back to get it on the ballot. And then the only job that the council does at that point is either give it to a special election, or we could change that wording too. I mean, it could go directly to the next election. The reason for the special election is if it's so important that it needs a special election, the council has the ability to do it. What the new Section 7 did was streamline the process so that you go from the petition to the council to the voter. So the question arises, which is the question that Aaron asked, does that mean that it should be a higher number up front, maybe to take into consideration the supplemental and the initiating in the first instance, so that if it's turned down and it goes directly to the voters, it has a bigger support than doing the supplemental, which requires all you get in the first petition, in the lower number petition, is an audience with the council. The council says we don't like it. You don't get another audience with the council again unless you bring in another 25. You need to bring another 50% of the vote of the numbers of citizens, and then they don't hear it. They send it off. So we can go back to the supplemental system. It begs a question for me that I've wanted to ask you all, which is, in your own minds, what have you been thinking about percentages? Because we've done all this good work. We're trying to rewrite the Section 7, especially so that the language issues have been addressed. I think personally that they're clear, at least to the extent that they're lawfully clear, and that the appendix gives a lot of help to citizens who don't want to hire lawyers, which I think is important to do. But what are the percentages going to be? We have 12,000 voters, registered voters in Greenfield. 10% is 1,200 people. 5% is 600 and something people.
So David, before we move on to that, I'm trying to look at the charter on the website and I don't actually see the appendix on here.
It's an exhibit to.
I do have a print version upstairs, but
The charter.
Sheila.
I'm sorry, David, you cut out.
Can you hear me now? Tell me when you can hear me.
I can hear you now.
Okay. The appendix I'm talking about is in exhibit draft 2, exhibit 7-7, which was with the materials that were sent to you this week.
Okay, it's not on the website?
It's on the website. If you want to look at the website, it's draft 2, section 7-7.
Okay. Yeah, I'll take a look at that and I'll give you a call this week.
Sure. Actually, what you should do, please, is make comments to Tammy, and then she'll send them out to everybody.
Okay.
So that's there are definitely people who are interested to know what you think. But that's where the numbers are, you know. The state law is kind of high. State law is like at 10, 12% of registered voters. And it gives a timeline. Some of the statutes are like 21 days. Although what we do to slow the process down is the state law says you have to file the petition within 21 days or 30 days, but you don't have to go through a lawyer's opinion, because when you do when you do the 7-8 petitioning, you're only saying yes or no to the measure. So you're not introducing new legislation. But in any event, but I know there are people in this community, and I think they're well served by the other notion that you know, it'd be nice to know that there's a way, if our current government isn't meeting the popular needs of our citizens, that there's a way to make yourself heard. So that's, if we want to make a recommendation of some sort, that's kind of where the parameters are right now, unless somebody wants to make something higher or make something lower than those parameters. But that feels like kind of their own public hearings and hear and decide what to do. But, you know, anyway, so that's where we're at on my list of stuff. And I'm okay with ending the meeting on this unless somebody else has something to say about it.
Could I raise
Yes.
something different?
Yes, please.
This has nothing to do with 7 or 7-8.
That's fine.
Okay. You asked before if there is some area that we should think about, redo, or revisit. I would like to go back over the language in regard to the assessor's office and operation.
Okay.
So I know this evening it's probably not a good idea, but if it could be included in next meeting, I would be very grateful for that. Thank you.
Chris, in order to even make it more efficient for everybody to look at it, what specifically are you looking to continue to talk about? We've put in statutory reference so that if they want to expand the number of assessors, they can. Is it the area of qualification, or what's the part that you would like to see more discussion on?
Well, I'd like to see more discussion on the organizational piece, because there are other models out there. Sister City, West Springfield, for instance, it's not an entity that kind of exists in its own right. It's more like it is part of and it's codified, and that's what I'm kind of after. It's part of the municipal Department of Municipal Finance. And so if that was discrete language in the charter, then that would put Liz, our finance director, in charge of these operations that would also include, which I know she's got now, is accounting, treasurer collector, treasurers and collection, which are two separate at this point. And then it would be assessing. And so there's a couple of models out there. Right now, this is basically the same thing we talked about with the Board of Health, only it's in reverse. And I know that sounds very odd, but I think we need to look at whether we want to be elected officials, appointed officials, or one or the other of them. Who's the direct report to whom, and what combination of things should be done in order for this to go into charter language. So that's what I'm after.
Okay, thank you. Can you put that wonderfully stated reason in an email along with some other sections we can all look at so we can talk about this at the next meeting?
Oh, yeah, sure. I have no problem with that.
Thank you. That'd be great.
Okay.
Just know that by statute, one of the assessors has to be elected.
I'm actually not sure about that. I think, I know I've read the law and I understand what it's saying, but I also see in West Springfield that they have a board of 3 assessors and not one of them are elected, they're appointed. Okay. Nobody that is appointed. So elected. So I'm wondering if, because we're home rule, like they are, if we can actually make the rule that we want to best serve the needs in Greenfield.
Okay, well, good. We can research that issue as well. That's great. Okay. Great. Thank you. Any other sections? Yes, Otis.
Thanks. I don't have any other sections that need a wholesale, looking at on my account. But I did want to say that I looked through the draft 2 that incorporated further comments, and I appreciate the work that you put into it, David. Thank you. And I'm more or less okay with most of it. I did agree with Aaron's comments around the temporary absence in the mayor. And so I would hope that we do have some more discussion around that piece at some point.
No, at some point is the next meeting. We're on, I mean, I'd like next meeting to kind of, that's why, so I'm narrowing. I can give you an agenda maybe based on this. I do have a question for Erin, not to put you on the spot, but I'm going to. You are very firm about not having pros and cons about the ranked choice voting, which is fine. But it doesn't, you have to help me understand why, if that's okay to do that, why you are insistent upon putting in that we got more letters that said the mayor shouldn't be the chair of the school committee, when that also is, like a sort of a, like we're leading people into a certain place, because that wasn't really, we didn't take a poll, we just so happened that was the case. So what is it about the RCV that, and I'm okay leaving it out, but I just don't know, I can't understand the consistency in terms of concept.
Well, I think we could say that we heard from more people, we heard from more people who were in favor of ranked choice voting. I think that's true. We didn't hear from anyone who said, I don't want the ranked choice voting in there, that I can recall. And we also did hear from more people who they did not want the mayor to be able to be school committee chair. Then we heard people in the opposite. The difference being, in the ranked choice voting, you're saying, here are the positives, but I don't know that we as a committee have agreed that those are, you say something like, the town or the election, a primary election is costly, which is true, but then it's a judgment call of whether or not you believe that the cost is worth it because you agree with having a primary election or not. So I just don't think that belongs necessarily. It's not the purview of this group to even put in ranked choice voting. We're telling the council, we heard from constituents who want this, and this is something that the council may want to explore because we did hear it, but it's not this group's job to say whether it should go in or not, because you have to have a whole different process for that.
All right, I put in though that on one side, the mayor being chair is blah, and on the other side, the mayor not being chair is blah. I actually put in two sides.
Sure.
Should I take them out?
If you feel like they're similar, then sure, take it out. I'd
rather keep them both in.
So if I may,
I'm not opposed to having I'm opposed to having the ranked choice voting pros and cons in. I wanted to say it in writing one more time because it was in there, and I'm just saying this, I'm opposed to having that in there. If the rest of the group thinks it's fine, if the majority of the people on this committee want to include it, then include it. It's okay with me to not have consensus on that if everyone else thinks it's fine. It's just something that I don't think we need to include.
Okay.
Because we're not going to put it, I think if we were putting in ranked choice voting, then we should, but we're not. It's a whole different process. So.
Okay.
So if you don't mind my interjecting here, so I think that all city councilors get a lot of emails about issues that people care about. And I think depending upon, your political stripes and who you're friends with and who your neighbors are, what precinct you live in, I think everyone's getting communications from different folks in town. And I think this is a popular enough issue that people are going to write to us, whether or not this body puts in pros or cons. People are going to be writing to their counselors saying, this is my take on this subject, and this is why you should, decide this way. So I don't think that it hurts anything to have that in. And I don't think that we're going to be exercising any kind of undue influence. I think what it's really going to come down to is how the counselors feel about an issue. And if the counselors themselves don't have a strong opinion, I know I do it if I don't feel strong. Well, it's, theoretically speaking, if I don't feel very strongly about an issue, I kind of have to go with what my neighbors say because I represent a specific precinct, but I usually feel strongly about issues. So I don't think we're changing the outcome of the vote by including a pros and cons list. Is kind of the short thing I'm trying to say.
Okay, thanks. Aaron, I won't bring it up again. I just wanted clarification. It's probably important that we might want to see what other members think once we get to that point. I just wanted to address it only because you had addressed it and I wanted to know that I had read it and that I had a question about it. I wasn't trying to put you on the spot, and you gave a strong response. Thank you. Okay, so yes, Sarah.
I just want to clarify about the percentages for the referendum and initiative. Is this, so they're left out in that draft as to provide the council the ability to make that, decision. But are you wanting us as a body to have a recommendation, or is that something we really do need to talk about, like at our next meeting, or so that we have a recommendation to send, or are we settled on sending it blank?
Good question. I am sort of teasing out from everybody their thoughts because I'm wondering if our thoughts wouldn't be helpful to the council. And maybe the harder discussion would be how we present our thoughts rather than whether we should have any thoughts. You know what I'm saying? Instead of saying like, we all think 5%, so that's it. That's not how I want to do it. It would be, if we have a good discussion about it, like what would 5% feel like? What would 10% feel like? What would 2% feel like? What would 15% feel like? And then maybe at the end, instead of it being the kind of discussion that I know it's going to be, I'd rather our group might be able to think about it like governing people. That's why I put the balancing test in there so that you could use it as a framework. I mean, it just was my way of thinking of it. Like at what point is it okay for people to jump in and participate? Yes, John.
I don't think we need to come to the count, the committee says X percent. I think what we need to do is have a discussion about the balance point, about when, does, how many people have to feel strongly enough about an idea to overturn, because it's not like people don't have a voice, they have a voice, they're representatives. So there's a big difference, I think, between saying, well, you got to let a smaller amount of people be able to push something like that through, or you're not giving people a voice. I just don't buy that argument. I think that it really has to be how big a percentage represents enough weight of the community to say, no, we love you, but in this case, we disagree with you so strongly. And I think the point about making it higher if you're going to go directly and not go back to them, whether it's a ministerial duty of theirs or not, David, I think that's the conversation to have. What is the balance point where we say the basic structure of how we do things? We elect people, we have them represent us, and that's how representative democracy works. Except I don't really like what they're doing, so we want to change it. I don't think that should be easy. I don't think it should be impossible, but I think that's the conversation to have. I like the balance point because I think that's the whole thing. I don't think we should be giving a number. I think we should be trying to say, here's how we think the argument should be framed, counsel. And then you.
Well, that's why I did the. Right.
Yeah,
That's why I did.
I thought that was a good way to say it. And I'd like us to try to tease that out a little more and say, here's why we think this, here's what we think you should be thinking about as you come to this number. Whatever.
Yeah, good. Erin, you started the conversation. You think that works?
Yes.
Sheila, you think that works?
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Okay, Alan?
Yeah,
Who am I missing? Chris?
Yeah, I have to sign in on the phone. Yes, I think so too.
Otis, you think that works?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to frame it.
All right,
And,
so let's have a good, healthy discussion next meeting on that. I actually think that'd be a lot of fun because we've put a lot of the what I'll call more mundane stuff behind us, and now we can talk about some meaty stuff. All right, so the next meeting would be we are in a short month. March 8th.
Yep.
So again, just so I get feedback, you're all happy with the style I'm using, the idea of having people read the charter and then go into a footnote to see the changes so they're in the section. Does that seem to be working? Because that was just an idea I had. If I could have Tammy do something different, but I did not want her to take all of our comments and try to redline that charter. That would not have been an easy task. So again, think about that. I'm imagining that once we get to the end, we might have a summary where everybody who wants to speak independently about what they think about the charter and the changes, and we can have a group statement like this is what we did, and then we might have each of you wants to add something to the summary. I'm planning on adding every single thing that the public sent us to the summary, not to the charter draft. So there's going to be like this, this will be the summary, 4 pages, 5 pages with the, and then the draft will be those exhibits that I've sent out. And if you want others, that would be fine as well. But more of a body, a document that somebody's going to take up to work on. And if they want to go back to the public, that's a different workout than taking the thing itself and taking the hard suggestions. So, all right.
So David, I have a conflict on the 8th. Would it be possible to do the 15th?
It's late.
Anybody else? Is the 15th a problem for anybody else? Okay, sure.
Thank you. It's my husband's birthday. He wants me to make dinner.
All right, let's codify that exception.
I have to make dinner on International Women's Day.
All right, that's okay. And as I always say, a motion to adjourn, and as we make that motion and approve it, thank you. You're all terrific, doing a great job. Can I have and I want to recognize that Councilor Sorger was on this meeting. Thank you. It was nice to watch you talk on the phone. Really, that was very good. I would have used my left hand, but everybody's different. All right, motion to adjourn.
So moved, Gilmore.
Second.
All right,
Really?
in favor, raise your thumb.
Aye.
Bye.
See you in 3
Ready,
weeks.
everyone.
Bye.
See you later,
Bye.
folks.